wiring right there. That's showing part.
Here at Uncle Ben. Those are fresh plugs too.
It's like 760. Weird size. Oh, you need an extension?
That's not the right size. 11/32 is not the right
No,
size.
the whole bunch of that. All of it.
Dude, it's just slipping. It's gonna strip the fuck out.
Where that came from, man? That's the problem with heavy maintenance engines.
Yeah, it's a funky side.
Hello, here we are again. Welcome to Ben Almeida Racing. I'm not in my office. I'm in here at the shop where I feel better talking about, racing engines or street engines, whatever floats your boat. Because when I'm sitting in my office, I feel like some kind of not a gearhead, but some kind of executive with no money. But anyway, just joking, guys. But anyway, here we go. There is an old saying out there, and for the most part I believe it, until much later I start to realize it's not really a true statement. And what is that statement, or what is that belief that everybody says, and that everybody goes, yeah, that's correct. The old saying of there's no replacement for displacement. True? Well, there is an exception. There is indeed a replacement for displacement. It's called RPM, or RPM potential. I've run all the 9.2 deck, 9.5 deck, and now I will share with you a 9.7 block that I do have. That is very interesting, but you got to be real careful when you build these tall deck engines, and they can make a lot of, cubic power, all right? But it's not gonna RPM. Like I said, 9.7 deck is a tall deck, 9.2 deck is a short deck, 8.2 is even a shorter deck. But for now, we'll focus on the 9.2 and 9.5, and then I'll touch bases on the 9.7 deck. Tall, small block, if that's the proper word or description. Anyway, here we go. Many people will say, just like I have this aluminum block here, 9.2 deck. You can really make good power with them. So let's start the discussion. Where does a 9.2 deck apply, and where does the 9.5 deck fit in? Well, not one configuration is best for all. If, we'll take example number one. If you have a car that's somewhat heavy, okay, 2,900 pounds or maybe 2,850, 3,200 pounds, then with that weight you need displacement. The only way you can get displacement in a good format is with a tall deck block. A 9.5 deck, you can go with a 4-inch stroke, 4,100, 4,170, 4,250. And I'll talk about an engine that had a little bit more than that. Now, when you have displacement, you have torque down low and mid-range, which you're not going to have with a short stroke combination, except you got lots of compression, of course. Compression will boost the torque range straight across. But RPM or stroke dictates where that RPM power band is going to be applied to. All right, you don't expect a long stroke engine with a small bore to make power upstairs. You're looking at a torque engine. Years ago, I had Jameson Suarez and we weighed about 2950, an all steel coupe LX, and here's a picture. This car ran basically a factory block, right? 60 over. I don't think I even cemented this thing with TFS high ports. With that combination, the car went 930 at 148 or 49 in Vegas, which is a high altitude track. At 930, that's basically a 9 flat run. Stock suspension, all steel. Okay, so through the mufflers, in fact, as you can see in that picture, what this combination entails is that he'd leave at 4,500 cups of mid-range torque. Of course, 4,170. And then when it leaves the line, he shifts it at 6,800, and it would run a mid-9 second pass on a good track. 10.5 slick by 29 or sometimes 28. That combination also, we were very quiet, ran a 389 gear. 410, a little bit, you know, I mean, not really, just got so much torque. 389, 391, or 411, it worked. And like I said, he leave the line at 4,500 on a trans brake, he shift at 6,800 with that 4,170 stroke, and did run mid-5s to 930 best. That's it. We eventually switched engines to a 4-inch stroke. Same basic camshaft. But what happened here, now shifting, instead of 6,800 on a 4-stroke, he basically with downstroke, but with a bigger bore at 4,125 to start. Okay, because we're on a budget, we didn't want to waste the block and go straight to 4,185 or 4,160. We, you know, wanted some longevity on the block, so that if we heard it, we could just bore next, you know, 5 over 10 to clean it up. But we started with a 4,125 on a 4-inch stroke, so 427. With a 4-stroke, now it's good to 8,000 plus. Best shift point for the camshaft, which is very similar to the 4,170. Okay, and 740 lift for both at that time, and well, yeah, this one right now is shifting at 8,000. 4,500 shift, 4,500 stall speed, slightly more. I think we went up to 55, close to 6,000 with a turbo 400. When you look at this combination, when we switch from the 170, 170, shifting at 68, now we're close to 8,000. A tad over, or sometimes 8,000 seems to be the sweet spot. Now we cut about a half a second quicker. Okay, so now we're a consistent high 8 to flat 9, using just about everything. Okay, why is that so? Well, the RPMs basically beat the torque combination. You know, you have another 68 to 8,000. You're looking at about, 1,200 RPM more of peak speed. So definitely, it could take. Well, both of them had a Dominator 1050, but now this one here wanted more CFM. But we stayed with the 1050 because that's what we have. So we did an apple-to-apple, comparison instead of a completely different combination. Say, oh, this is better. We already saw right there, and the gear requirements on the rear end went from 410 to now we're at 456. Definitely an improvement because the RPM potential. Again, same thing with Irwin Couliard with this Mustang. When it had a 415, okay, a small bore 4-inch stroke, that car was responsive. Same combination, it runs basically what James's car ran with a 415, mid-5. But what's interesting was when he also picked it up to a big bore combination, I think 150 or something like that. Again, the RPM went up. Eventually we switched to a bigger cylinder head, which is the Blue Thunder. And this car basically ran a 540 in the 8th mile with, a dual dominator 1050 on a sheet metal intake made by Hogan. But looking back, years ago, my street car, 4170, 60 over, through the muffler with 9x26 Racemaster, M&H Racemasters. This thing ran 1030 and the best of 1020. But the funny thing with that was same stuff. I would brake torque it at 4,500 RPM. I would brake torque it at like 1,500, 1,600. It had a 4,000 stall, 4,500 stall converter. And I let go of the brake and mash the pedal. Boom, it's gone. Here it is. Amazing thing about this, it had DFS high ports with an 850 carburetor. That was a 1030 car through the muffler, 389 gears. Okay, when we switched to 410, it didn't change anything. It still ran the same because you had gobs of torque. So this is a good example. Okay, so displacement through stroke is a good thing when the car's heavy. That was a car that weighed 3,080 when we tipped the scales at Bakersfield with me in the car. So the 4170 is excellent. Eventually, somebody built a similar engine to that. And what they did was they increased the flow of the heads. I did a 30-degree seat there as an experiment on the intake, just to see how low lift flow would affect the doggone car that has already gobs of torque. And when you have a flatter intake valve or intake seat, the low lift flow is big time. And then you combine that with lots of displacement, you basically got a stub puller. That's why I would come up to the line at 1,500, let go the brake pedal, just mash the gas, shift at 6.8, boom, 1030. At 3,080 pounds with tiny slicks through the muffler. Eventually somebody copied that basic engine, but they took the 850 out. They put a Dominator. Similar head, but theirs flowed a little bit more than ours. So now you have a Dominator instead of an 850 on this stroker combination. Big bore, small bore, long stroke. More airflow, Dominator, everything looked good. It showed good power on the dyno. When it went up to the track in a 2,700, about 26 to 2,700 pound car, it ran 1040. What happened? Okay, 1030 on a 3,080 pounds. Now they improved the heads, they improved the intake. They went up, they basically built a torque engine into a high RPM wannabe engine. It don't want to rev. So everything's up sky high, 7,000 plus. I think 74 or 7,600. It lost all sorts of low and mid-range torque at the pursuit of high RPM in an otherwise long stroke engine. And I have more example of this coming up. When that happened, the car it's in it now was a lot lighter. 1040. So go figure. 1030, 850, 68 shift point. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. doggone, 26? Yeah, 2,600, 500, 600 pounds lighter. It went about a tenth slower. 26? Yeah, 2,600. Yeah, it went a tenth slower. So how do you figure this thing out? Okay? Because when you have a long stroke combination, you're trying to make it rev. Not gonna work. Okay? It's like taking daddy long legs, a spider, and trying to give him RPM. It's not gonna run. It's gonna trip over its own dick. It's gonna trip over its own leg. Got too much, okay? And then you take that combination, shorten the legs a little bit, so you can have this quick reacting come out of the gate, especially when you combine that with gears, because now you have extra RPM, you gear down lower, you have more RPM up top, so now you get a quicker combination. So you don't turn a turtle into a rabbit, okay? Or it just won't work. It doesn't have the capability of RPM. It's got too much internal drag and the piston speed's too quick. Short stroke is like constant, up and down. Long stroke engine, pause a little bit, it'll do LTDC, and then come down. So all this acceleration from top dead, it's too much internal drag. It doesn't want RPM because the doggone pistons, they park at TDC with a long stroke and a long rod as well. Okay, so there is that combination that you gotta look at and say, what happened there? If we would have stayed with that combination, or they would have stayed with that, and I told them before, don't do much changes to what I had. Do it exactly like what I had and just do some finer improvements. Imagine that 1030 car at 3,080 now is in that 2,600 pound car or 2,700 pound car. How fast would it be? It'll be deep in the nines, okay? So the engine was in the wrong chassis now, okay? Because now it's lighter, but it's got a torque engine that you want to rev or you want to turn to an RPM engine. It's not gonna like it. So here we are. Combination didn't work out for them. What a bad mistake. In fact, Joe Mondello at that time, he was working with the wet flow bench, wanted to know about my combination there. He goes, Ben, I saw that car. It was very fast. What did you do there? Because he was into Oldsmobiles, I think, or Pontiacs or Oldsmobile. Toilet, they call him Toilet Joe Mondello. His commercial for his technical school has got a toilet seat on there. It's crazy. Nice guy. He tried to get me to work for them or teach at that technical school he had in Santa Maria. He tried to get me to quit my LAPD job, but I said, if you could match my pension and whatever I make, I'm there. I would love to do it, but he could match it up. So he's wished me luck and kept in touch until he passed on, several years later. But what a nice guy. Anyway, go back to this doggone long stroke combination. What I told him is that this long stroke combination doesn't like too much plenum, too big a carburetor. It's a torque monster. But at that time, I didn't know too much about the annular discharge carburetor yet. I will soon find out eventually. But this combination today, okay, 4170 or 4100 in fact, I could get this doggone thing to run pretty much mid-9, okay, to 970, mid-9, 950 on the same basic configuration. Stock suspension, 10.5, 28, maybe 29 to the muffler. Sure, it's doable. But also, there's another friend of mine, Joe Takuchi, from, I think it's from Redondo Beach. He's got a 4100 stroke 351 with stock 220 cylinder heads from AFR. This thing runs mid-9s with hardly any work on the heads except what it came in from the factory. Here he is. that shows, and that car is not light. Okay, it's all steel with a fiberglass hood, of course. 67 or 68. Look how strong it runs. And eventually we will be plating that cylinder head and kick up the intake ports. And he should pick up 3/10, 4/10, and pick up the camshaft as well. Because, you know, the 220, I think, gets about 340 or something like that, CFM at 28. By the time it's plated, it'll probably be in the 375, 380 range. Okay, and of course we changed the AFR heads to 52 degree seat as well. And this combination is also very, very impressive because you got a 4/100 stroke, not a 4-inch 408. Okay, and it hauls butt. And I tell you, mid-9s with that combination, stock suspension as well. Looks like Irwin's car, but it's an older, you know, it's a 67 or 68 chassis. It's very impressive. Now we go back to the 4-inch stroke, 351 Windsor. Now it depends what kind of cylinder heads you run. This combination, I did a Yates head. Okay, it didn't flow very much then. The car went 930s at 149. Weight about 2,900 pounds or 2,850. It wasn't light, it wasn't heavy either. Okay, but I had a 4-inch stroke and I was shifting that at 84. This car drastically changed when it went from a 4/170 stroke to 4-inch stroke. It really picked up big time. Note the crushed bottom of the chin of the car from all the wheel stands. And look, there's even no K-frame. That's a factory K-frame on it. This was before K-frame really got big. And a lot of us were still running that due to budget and stuff. Anyway, that's what it looked like back then, 1990, 91. And it's an RPM engine with a 4-inch stroke. Now I had a 4/125 bore, 427 cubic and small block. What happened here was that it had an RPM potential. Would I have gone faster with a 4/170 or 4/100? I doubt it, because the head I have is a high RPM cylinder head. Plus I have a sheet metal intake from Hogan. Well, I got that basically free, because my mentor, Chuck, he paid him a visit and said we needed a manifold, and then we had the famous Santa Maria barbecue, so he made us the manifold for free. Thanks to my mentor Chuck. Boy, he did me a lot of favor, and he was very tight with Hogan. And well, you know, this intake is right here. It's a dedicated 4-barrel or Dominator intake. The end ports were not, straight up, but this one was really a good combination. You know, the end ports were tilted, and that made it function as a high RPM intake manifold. So did the heads. So I looked at the 4-inch stroke as more like a sane. I'm not going to turn too high of an RPM. You know, first I couldn't afford the valve train or the valve spring changes at that time. They weren't really as good as they are today. Then, you know, you'd lose it pretty quickly. I used to fire up the engine and heat cycle it many, many times before I go out to the track, so that the doggone valve springs don't get thermal shock and lose its tension or lose its pressure right off the get-go. Okay, so I do a lot of heat cycle around the block in my house, back on the trailer, fire up again, and that's what I did. So now let's go back and look at today what I'm doing. 9.2 deck. Why is a 9.2 deck better than a 9.5? Let's put it this way. When you're on a 9.2 deck, you don't have the stroke. You can put in a 3.85 or a 4-inch stroke if you want, but the rod's going to be short. It's going to be fighting itself. But I choose the 9.2 deck with a 3.750 stroke. That's what we have with Brad, Udell's, our Team USA, Udell, Sniff, and Alameda. We've gone very quick with that, and it's not even really, well, we haven't really done any improvements other than retiming the camshaft and checking all those stuff. And it's an old engine, it's tired. But, well, we ended up third in points at the 10.5, the West Coast 10.5 series. Third in points is not bad, considering we pretty much new kids on the block, trying to figure our combination out until we get this new Brodix headed engine. It should be a big difference, because now we have the displacement and the RPM. Because right now at NA, we're I think 2850 or 2750, so it's got some weight. Cubic inches don't hurt. But when you have a very light car, all right, 26, 2750 on down, 9.2 with high compression, and of course 3.750 stroke or 3.6 or 3.5, whichever way, you have the RPM potential. You can get up to 9,000 with relative ease, no problem, as long as you have the valve train, the rocker arms, and the geometry is all correct. Let me tell you a story, and this happened twice. We had a car, or I had a car running very, very fast. I want to say who. And this thing, 9.2 deck, is very impressive. Nitrous. You don't need the displacement when you have a 2750, 2800 pounds, whatever, or even 3,000 pounds when you got nitrous oxide or boost or turbocharge. When you have those assistants, you can forego the displacement, because this doggone engine at 3.750 stroke, it has a lot of RPM potential, and your perceived lackluster low end compared to a 4-stroke or 4.170 or whatever, it leaves the line very hard. Okay, so when you have a 9.2 deck unaspirated, it's gonna be doggone, will it be fast. Now, I can't really say how fast it went, because it's out there, and a lot of people know me, probably know what this car is. It's won a bunch of races. And one day, we had the opportunity to run somebody's engine. It's a more than 4.250 stroke, displacing 460 plus, Windsor. Now, for our 400 incher, or 401, well, no more than 405 now, I think, when we've bored out. When you look at this combination with a 4150 intake manifold, basically 750, that probably flows a little bit more, but the base plate is a 4150. We ended up with a bigger engine with a Dominator now, with a 2828 intake instead of our Super Victor on a 9.2. What happened here is that we're 200 pounds, approximately 200 pounds lighter with a Dominator instead of 4150. 2828 manifold, which is very aggressive compared to the Super Victor on our 9.2. Guess what happened? It didn't even go a tenth quicker. At 200 pounds lighter, having more displacement. Here's where I said, there is no replacement for displacement. Is it really? It's called RPMs. This was an 1/8 mile. If it's an 1/8 mile, of course the displacement, since it's got more torque, and if it's on nitrous, will help it, definitely. But if it was a 1/4 mile, well, guess what? The long stroke engine is going to be fighting itself while it builds RPM. The short stroke, you see it starts to RPM and it's gone. That is the most big, or the most obvious difference between a short stroke and a long stroke, or a tall deck or a short deck. Just look at an 1100, Harley Davidson. Another aspect that you gotta look at is the tall deck. When you try to RPM it, there is an issue about the rod. The taller deck height requires a longer rod. When you're talking RPM, rod weight is critical, just like piston weight is just the same. It is a critical aspect to be concerned with. When you shorten the rod to cut down the length, to cut down the weight, now the piston has to be longer. When it used to be very short, okay, because the pin height and the long rod, but now you shorten the rod to save some weight, now the piston becomes heavier. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. The best move here to get the RPM potential is to cut the short deck down. All right, so when you have a short deck, then what happens here is that the piston becomes light, of course, because the deck is lower. The piston becomes shorter. Also, with the short deck, the rod length becomes shorter. Both lighter rod, lighter piston plays into the equation of a short deck block. Additional length that you gotta add on the piston or the rod, depends what you want to do. You want a real high pin height on the piston, or you want a lower pin height, makes the piston heavier. The shorter rod, definitely lighter, but there's a compromise. Okay, the more you put that pin higher in the piston, you're pushing. Okay, it wants to do this. All right, let's say this is the pin. There's an exaggeration, of course. That's a high piston. Now, but if your piston is, your rod are longer, you're from here. All right, it's less of these issues as opposed to a short rod. Okay, there's the piston crown. It wants to wobble up top. Also, you got to look at. Here's an issue that concerns everybody that's seriously building an engine. A 9.2 deck, all right? Guess what happens with the manifold? From the carb to the flange of the port, it's shorter. The higher the deck, and the carb is a single carb or even a dual carb, the taller the deck, the farther away from the carburetor center line or center, the runners become longer again. So when you have a short deck, a 9.2, and then you put the same combination, now you're a 9.5 deck with the same head. Guess what? It got farther apart, the runners are longer. But let me tell you one trick. I'll see if I can find the pictures. I did several 9.2 deck with a 9.5 manifold. Here are some pictures. Here's a picture of an AFR head. The TFS would work better because they don't have the lip that is shown right there that I machine off when I put the plate. If you don't have this plate, if let's just say this is a TFS twisted wedge R or first generation, or even the high port, you don't have that lip, this one will bolt straight up to there and sit flush, and you look at the gap here because there's a 9.5 deck. I think this is a 28-28. Look how far that is. Okay, you just have to put a isolator plate there or a heat plate, and you can make up the gap big time. Therefore, when this is cut off, this will sit a lot more flush, okay? And it makes it so much more workable, and your port is real high this time around. Okay, so just think about this as a twisted wedge. This AFR, I did a double gasket, the thickest that Felpro makes, and I silicone the bottom, and then I silicone the next half, and then it's fine. It'll work. Okay, and it should be workable. Or just make a plate pattern after the Felpro 1262R. It'll be just as good. Here you can see a close-up. I already have silicone there, and I sandwiched this too, and you're still far. Okay, so with two super thick Felpro 1262R, I don't know what the part number is, I forgot. You can sandwich them, and this will bolt right up. Then you can just move up your intake port. Either you weld the top of the port on the AFR, no welding on the TFS needed, but you're fine right here. You're pretty good. Or if you want to be a little bit more cautious, cut a section of this off, just a tad bit, to keep it away from the manifold, but you're going to be fine. So now you gain quite a bit of port height, and of course more horsepower through added airflow. When you make the runners bigger without adding volume, guess what? You pick up horsepower through airflow, additional airflow, without much expense on other part of the RPM range. Like I said before, if this one increased by 200 or 300, whatever that might be, I don't remember, you also do the floor increase the same amount, 200 or 300, so the port volume would hardly change. Here's the Wool products. If you notice, they have a machined surface right here. I wonder what they meant for that. Maybe for different deck heights or whatever. But I ran this one the way it is, with two sandwiched Felpro, as far as I remember, was it Mr. Gasket 1262R type big ports. Now you can see the Wool products manifold. Look at that plate, how that's machined. Fits perfectly into this scenario with a double gasket. Okay, so you're still very, very good here. You're far from having interference with a valve cover rail. If need be, you just cut off maybe 50 thousandths off the rail. That should still be fine. So that'll be that's just a minor issue, and you gain more power with a 9.5 on a 9.2 deck block. 9.5 manifold on a 9.2 deck block. Here's the two manifold that I've used for that swap. That's I think that's the Wool products. I don't even know if it's still in production. And of course the Super Victor right there. And you can see the height difference. The potential is right there. It's a shorter runner, a little bit longer. But hey, it's up to you. Whichever one you think applies for your combination. What you've achieved there, like you've seen on my previous video how I plate the intake port. Here you don't have to plate the intake port. The TFS heads, which I always favor, or the AFR, you could cut off that one section of the head flange, like it is here. But here's the difference. When you run a 9.5 manifold on a 9.2 deck block, guess what? The intake port, since it's a wider manifold, sits higher on the V. All right? When it sits higher, the port, here's the stock port, now it's over here. Guess what? Now you can move the intake port higher without using a plate or without doubling the plate, not just one plate, not two plates perhaps. Here you have no plates at all. All you got to do is move the port up in case of a TFS, R, original twisted wedge, high port, a lot of other heads without the lip on the valve on the valve cover side of the intake flange. When you do this, you automatically have a higher port angle. And who's going to argue with you that the lower port is actually better? Everybody in their right mind will always say the higher the port, the better. Later on, there's a point of diminishing returns, but it's definitely better. Okay? And when you do this, 9.5 Super Victor, okay, or Victor Jr. on a 9.2 deck, just like here, it fits in there perfect. You can't even tell. So when somebody looks at your manifold, go, oh, I know you got a 9.5 deck block, because that's what it says on the manifold. Yeah, it's actually a 9.2 with a 9.5 manifold. Little trick, guys, be quiet. Shh. But anyway, hey, guess what? Now you're a higher port angle because the manifold sits higher, and you can just make your adjustment on the intake port, and the runners are shorter. So when you build the same cubic inch, 408, let's just say, on a 9.2 deck, or 400 on a 9.2 deck, and also 400 on a 9.5 deck. Granted, you're a 4-inch bore and 4-inch stroke. Okay, remember, bore and stroke 4-inch. Okay, on a 4-inch diameter, your stroke is your displacement. 4-inch bore, 4-inch stroke, 400. Now, same thing with the Chevy. When you have this layout, the potential, same cubic inches, but the RPM potential is better. Okay, extreme RPM now. Okay, because there's also an advantage to a long rod, no doubt about it. And then again, there's the point of diminishing returns of weight of the piston or weight of the rod when they're too long. Or either one, when you try to compromise the shorter rod, piston becomes heavy. Or you make the rod longer, now your piston is shorter, but now your rod is heavier. Okay, so here we are. RPM, we're talking about RPM here. Remember, the replacement for displacement is RPM. You have two 400 cubic inch small block Fords, but now the other was a 9.2 deck. Okay, that is if it's 4-inch. But what happens here, now you got a shorter manifold, okay, a shorter runner altogether. That's a small bore, long stroke against this doggone Suzuki's, Hondas, Yamaha's, Japanese crotch rockets. They got lots of RPM, basically with the same displacement. The capability is there. Then they gear them lower, boom. All right, now you got something going. Now let's look at the scenario. If, let's say, you put a 3750 stroke on a 351, okay, and now you also have a 3750 stroke on a 9.2 deck. The other was 9.5 deck. The mere fact that if you didn't swap that manifold, you didn't use a 9.5 manifold on that 9.2, the doggone thing is going to sit lower in there because the V is not as big. Okay, I'm exaggerating here. Runner, shorter. Okay. Of course, if both of them have the same cubic inches, all right, guess what happens? With a 3750, let's say both of them, 9.2 and 9.5, the shorter runner, if you're running a Victor, a Super Victor on both, 9.5 and 9.2, the potential for the RPM is with the 9.2. The potential for more horsepower, of course, is with the 9.2 because it's a shorter manifold. Remember, like I said about the unequal ports on the big block Chevy, one port is shorter, it peaks at a higher RPM, and the other port is longer. Okay, now that peaks at a lower RPM because it's a longer runner. So you had a broader thing, RPM range across the board with the two unequal ports. But now everybody don't care about that. They want symmetrical ports, everything the same, like the Cleveland. So now, a lot of people say, oh, the Cleveland was derived from the big block Chevy. Well, Tim explained that a real beautiful explanation that it's not. But at the same time, both of them are cantilevered, the Cleveland and the big block Chevy. But guess what? Now the big block Chevy look like the Cleveland. It's symmetrical port. Okay, so who copied who? It depends on what side of the rail you're arguing from. Okay, so there we are. That's the key. 9.2 versus 9.5. Now let's talk about the 9.7 deck. That will give you or allow you to run a long rod with a long stroke. Okay, just like I said, okay, with that long stroke engine against our 9.2, against a 4.250 racing engine, you know, with big heads and everything, not being any really quicker, actually it's slower if the weight was the same. And the quarter mile would have been worse for them. Don't build, or I dissuade somebody from building a longer stroke again on a 9.7 deck, 351 Windsor, or 351 Cleveland, Maine with a Windsor configuration, 9.7. The stroke is really big. Now, if you're looking at a stump puller or a mud bog, perhaps, or a hill climb, sure. Okay, four-wheel drive, lots of stroke. It's going to be gangbusters on the bottom. But then again, the thing that I don't know is how far I can pull. I did it before with an I-beam configuration on the connecting rod, not like an H-beam. It has a more, you know, the I-beam comes in with the rod bolts there. The shoulder hits the cam lobe. Now with the H-beam, it has more like a more sloping shoulder on the connecting rod. Here's what I'm talking about. All right, this I-beam has got a real broad shoulder here. This one hits the cam lobe on a Chevy and some with a Ford. When you're in a Ford 250 stroke and you use the I-beam, it's a no-no. You got to run a H-beam, which has a sloping shoulder, unlike this one here. Now, what you want to do is run this kind of connecting rod with a tilted rod cap. This is the connecting rod that I suggest you try to have made for this custom 9.7 deck block. This will clear the camshaft when the connecting rod is looping around with a big stroke. And this is probably a good alternative for people who like to run a small block Chevy with a big stroke camshaft, because every time I do a big cubic inch small block Chevy with a short deck height, the cam to crank distance is too close and I end up running a small base circle camshaft. Not really what I like, because it has a tendency to twist the cam while it's running. So your front lobes near the timing chain probably runs ahead. By the time it gets to the back with big numbers on the camshaft, it's probably retarded because it's twisting while it goes farther back. For this 9.7 deck, you don't have to use a small diameter cam, it'll work just fine. So you can have all the stroke in the world, but again, don't RPM this thing. But if you got a mud bog or some kind of hill climb or rock climb, sure, that extra stroke, you're going to have a big block pulling. And I think this 9.5 deck to a 9.7, the 9.5, well, with, you know, 4-bolt main and motorsport block or dart, you're probably tipping the scale about 550, displacing, you know, 427, 454, whatever. This 9.7 perhaps will be about, you know, 20 pounds more, if that. And, you know, you could probably build a 480 or maybe more. But until I get a hold of one and somebody wants me to do one, then I think I'm going to use the tilted rod cap and a small base circle cam, and then you can put perhaps a 4.3, 300, 4.3, 25. That's you know, to be seen. I got to cycle it first, because before, when I did 454 small block on an off-road truck, the shoulder, the I-beam shoulder, was an Oliver rod. It was very close to the rod to cam lobe, so that's a concern. Okay, so do this planning in advance, and I think you should be fine. And it's going to be pretty good. I don't know if you can buy a head big enough, all right? And you don't want to use a hammer head, which I feel is the best one out there, because it's not an RPM motor. You might have displacement, sure, but it's it's really, I think, a weird combination to have a low RPM Hemi head or hammer head combination. So there you are. You have the things, you know, And here's the photo of these 9.7 blocks. This is the 9.7 deck height, 351. And when you look, the distance right here, there's another 200. The 500 sits right there. And look at the wall there, the manifold wall by the distributor. You can tell this is much taller. Because when you're looking at the 9.2 right about here, the 9.5, and there's a 9.7. Very impressive. Here you can see the bottom end. It's sturdy. Look at that. And then they got dowels there to locate the caps so they don't move around when you tap them in before you torque them. Pretty impressive piece. One piece rear main, as you can tell right there. Very stout bottom end for those big strokers. 4-bolt main on all 5 main bearing saddles, and also I posted what kind of connecting rod would fit this kind of combination, especially with a big stroke. Perhaps I think you probably forced 4350 in here, or 4300. It's very possible with the connecting rod I suggest. Top of the lifter valley, you see right there, there's some vent holes, not that many. You can see the crossover on the front, and looks like, of course, it's got an enlarged crossover on the back. Not a freeze plug, but it has a fitting there where you can screw in a plug. Therefore, I hope we got a little bit clearer on this thing. All right, so again, some people I know has done an 8.2 deck with a 9.2 manifold, and they did the same thing because they're trying to get the RPM as best as they could. And you really need to do this to get the most ultimate. Oh, before I close, when you run a 9.2 deck and you're strictly high RPM, make sure you run this block. This is what I want for very high RPM engines. Part number Dart Iron Eagle, part number 31384195. 31384195. It's got a 302 type crankshaft on a 9.2 deck. Excellent. I like that. Like I said, those 302 crankshaft on a 9.2 deck is an RPM beast. Okay, anything to cut down on internal rotating mass, bearing drag or surface drag, hydrodynamic drag, when it's got oil in there and everything, swinging around, it wants to slow it down. When you freed it up, it's small diameter, the bearing speed is slower. With a Honda Journal on a 302 main in a 351 9.2 deck, boy, you got the ultimate high RPM potential. That's what I plan to do with my combination. I was going to run a 9.2 deck, okay, hammerhead, cylinder heads, and of course 9.2 deck with a 302 main crankshaft, and a Honda Journal or a BMW Journal. But anyway, those are light stuff. I need to RPM 9,000 plus, and I think the Hemi is going to be hard to beat, or the semi-Hemi. The Boss 429 copier, the Hammerhead is not really a full Hemi, but a semi-Hemi. Okay, so give me some comments here, and please subscribe, like, and share, and then we can keep this going. And next time I'll talk about some more good stuff. All right? Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.